Okay, good afternoon. So we're moving to chapter 8. So sa chapter 8 is more on the algae group. So this will include the unicellular algae group and the multicellular. And most of the algae group are usually found sa aquatic environments because they don't have cellulose to protect themselves. So they are prone to dehydration. So an adaptation to that, they live in highly moisturized area. So they are highly dependent sa amount of water. Now, what are the general characteristics of an algae? So cell composition ranges from unicellular to multicellular. One example ng unicellular, we have the amoeba, euglena, volvox. Colonial ang volvox. Didynum, isa ay Giardia lamblia. Sa multicellular organisms, we have the kelp, yung inyong ginakaon na guso, mga lato. Yan, those are example of a seaweed and an algae. Now, the algae belongs to the kingdom Protista because this type of kingdom is a kingdom where confusing identities and class groups. Kasi nandito yung multicellular, nandito yung unicellular, tapos ang behavior niya is likely in between the animal and at the same time, behavior of a plant. Now, these groups, some are autotrophic or both autotrophic or heterotrophic. Again, when we say autotrophic, they have the ability to synthesize for their own food. And heterotrophic, these are organisms that are dependent the energy from other organisms. Like us, we are heterotrophs. We acquire our energy from plants and animals. Now, for form of reproductive structures, we call it gametangia, or this is a structure where the gametes are formed. Then they are more on aquatic. Some may have locomotory organs like flagella, cilia, and pseudopodia. Often contains pyrenoids. So these are organelles that synthesize starch. So murag mga pigments like chlorophyll. So they are eukaryotes also. So these are the first group of cells under the eukaryotic domain. So they are the simplest form of living eukaryotes. They usually found in fresh water and marine ecosystem, and some in highly moist habitats like rainforest, because our rainforest is highly moist ecosystem. They contain chloroplasts. That's why they have the ability to reproduce their own food or generate their own food. So pigment used for photosynthesis may vary to what type of algae group. And this is also used as part of their classification. So bakit may classification ng algae? Ay isa sa mga gamit nito, ginamit for comparison ay yung pigment nila. So we have two types of algae based on structure. So we have the microalgal group and the macroalgae group. Microalgal usually are unicellular, while macroalgal are called multicellular. One example of macroalgae, you have the kelp, the seaweeds, yung lato nakikita, yung binebenta sa palengke. What is the similarities of the algae group from the plants? First, the presence of cell wall. They are mostly composed of cellulose. Next, most green algae have cellular wall made up of cellulose, and they can produce their own food, so they could undergo photosynthesis, so they are autotrophic, and the presence of chlorophyll A. Now, the difference between algae and plants. Okay. Algae lack root systems, at the same time stems and leaves and flowers. And also the tissue level is not, algae have simple tissue level, while ang plant group have several tissue levels. So mas complex ang tissue levels ng plant kingdom. Algae don't have vascular tissues. More on non-vascular because algae, the one way to get their nourishment is from the environment through simple diffusion. And variation in pigments. Variation in cell structure, unicellular, pwede silang colonial, and multicellular. So that is the characteristics ng algae. While sa plants, they are multicellular. Now, in terms of cellular organization, some algae group have flagella. Instead of flagella, meron ding cilia, like sa Paramecium. Flagella, like sa mga zoomastigotes, we have the Trypanosoma, who uses flagella as their locomotory organ. But there are also algae, protist cells that don't use cilia nor flagella, but they use pseudopodia. They call it pseudopodia because pseudo stands for false, podia for feet. So they look like have a feet, so false feet. Chloroplast is the site of photosynthesis. Thylakoids are present in the chloroplast. And the pigments are present in the thylakoids, which is also similar like what we have in plants. Pyrenoids, structure associated with chloroplast. So it contains carboxylase, proteins, and carbohydrates. Eye spot, parts of the chloroplast. So it directs towards the light. So ang eye spot is a specialized sensory organ ng unicellular na protist to detect light. So munang na ay phototaxis. That is a reaction to a light stimuli. In terms of reproduction, so there are 3 types of reproduction occurred in this kingdom, sa Protistan kingdom. We have the vegetative cell division or fragmentation, in which a part of the organism was torn and developed into a new individual. Ang isa naman is asexual reproduction by the development of zoospores. So no sexual fusion. And also, yung pinaka is the sexual reproduction using the gametes. We have the female and the male gametes. So these are the 3 ways where the protist able to reproduce. So in asexual reproduction, it could either be fission or budding. So budding, when a portion was being removed. So we have here asexual reproduction ng mga zoos. Some will produce zoospores. So a sporangium, inside the sporangium, it contains zoospores. So isogamy, we have 2 terms, isogamy, anisogamy, and oogamy. So when we say, in terms of the gamete development, when we say isogamy, both have flagella and similar size and morphology. So the gametes have similar appearance. At the same time, similar in size, whatever the structure. The meaning of iso means equal. Iso refers to equal. Anisogamy. Anisogamy, these are gametes with different, nawala ang anisogamy. Teka ha, I will check anisogamy. Murmoni ang different features of gametes. Magkaiba, opposite ang shape ng oospores and opposite din, different naman ang appearance ng zoospores. And all gametes with flagella fuses with a large non-flagellated gamete. So that is oogamete. Okay, next. So these are the alternative generation of the protist group. So we have the zygotic meiosis, the sporosic meiosis, and the gametic meiosis.
Excuse me, ma'am. Ano si ma'am ba si Kuya Sean bitaw ma'am na Kuya Sean kel kunanan ma'am ba na di daw siya maka-join daw sa meet daw ma'am kay nag-blackout daw sa ilaha.
Ilang pinako na kay question. Okay lang. Okay lang, okay lang. Nag-blackout.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes. Okay siguro ka, Leon, kung ikaw officer ba? Anong mag-host? Okay, so let's proceed. Sa gametic meiosis, it started from a diploid life cycle. Then later on, magiging haploid. So the diploid life cycle, if we're going to start in a diploid matter, they have a distinct male and female gamete organs. Now we have the oogonium, which releases egg, and the anteregia produces sperm. So once the male and the female gametes meet together and fertilize ng sperm si egg, it forms into a zygote. Now, before releasing the gametes was developed through meiotic division. So from diploid, magiging haploid na ito. Then, once the zygote is, magiging diploid na ang zygote, then, meiotic division na. Now, the difference between meiosis and mitotic pala. Mitotic division retains the quality of genetic makeup or the number of chromosomes. It only identical din ang content for each cell. Now, we have here sporic meiosis. Now, the gametes are developed in a sporophyte. So, sporophyte, like what we have the gametic meiosis. Now, the sporophyte releases. Okay. So, the sporophyte, merong two gametophytes which are identical. Identical ang gametophyte. The gametophytes will release the gametes. Then it undergoes fertilization and zygote will be formed. Then the zygote continuously dividing until it becomes a sporophyte. Now, the sporophyte contains two diploid na siya because of the gametes are haploid. Then the sporophyte undergoes meiotic division producing zoospores. Now the zoospores will develop gametes that later on turns into gametophyte, a part of it that will release the gametes. So ang gametophyte, these are the organ or a part of the multicellular algae that produces gametes. Yan siya. While ang zygotic naman, it's zygotic. Asa ta gusto pwede. Okay. Okay, zygotic. It starts from the zoospores. Doon tayo mag-start sa zoospores. Asa may okay. From fertilization, if ever we have identical ang ang mga gametes niya. So, usually it was represented as plus and minus sign lang. Like sa bryophytes, hindi totally identified ang characteristics ng gametes. So, it was usually mark as plus minus. To indicate lang na they are separate gametes, plus minus. So once they have fertilization, it forms into zygospores instead of zygote. It develops into a zygospore, another form of zygote. Then, itong zygospore undergo meiotic division. So, once na mudako na siya, it releases a cell na haploid. Now, each haploid cells undergoes mitotic division. Then, since haploid man sila, once they release yung gametes na plus minus, then that's the time they will mate and fertilize again to form zygospore. So that is a haploid life cycle. Ito diplonic life cycle. Ito diploid life cycle. So in short, a common comments on the kingdom Protista is a complicated kingdom. Now, what are the morphological characteristics? So they are classified based on structural. Some say may call na unicellular algae and the other group is multicellular. Now, in terms of unicellular algae, some are motile, some are non-motile. Example is Chlamydomonas or Euglena, they are motile. The non-motile group, you have the Chlorella. So these are examples of Chlorella, Euglena, and Chlamydomonas. Chlamydomonas, makita nyo ito, we have here, saan na yun? The flagella. So Euglena,
question ma'am.
Unsa man?
Dagan man sila kanang way of reproduction ma'am.
Unicellular lang man sila. So it depends on the type of conditions sa environment. Kung isa lang ang ilahang way of reproduction, dali lang sila mawala sa kalibutan.
Kato bitawng isa bitaw ma'am nakatong mag-germination sila ma'am. Unsay kalahian niya sa kanang cloning ma'am sa animal kingdom?
Ang cloning, sige, rephrase nimo ang
mga. Di ba ang kanang sa animal kingdom kinakabay ka na mag-reproduction na kanang cloning pati po sa plant kingdom ma'am. Unya sa kanang sa protist ma'am ba kay katong part bitaw na katong cycle bitaw nila ma'am na nagkuhan sila og germination. Kalamit ko sa animal pa kay ko familiar pero
mura siya cloning.
Mura siya cloning ma'am. So
natural yan siya na cloning process sa protista. Mura siya cloning siya kasi na-retain niya ang iyahang genetic makeup. Kung sa man ang gireproduce niya, identical lang gihapon ang daughter cells. But naturally sa animal kingdom, ang cloning dili siya possible. Pero more on siya sa artificial reproduction. When you say artificial reproduction, ang cloning in higher animal na ay human intervention. Muna siya. Muna nahitabo ang cloning. Pero in a natural setting, cloning, hinahinay na siya magkawala ang kanang cloning process dito sa mga invertebrates. Pero kung maadto na siya sa higher vertebrate group, especially sa mammals, wala na. Pero sa sa mga fishes, murag naapa, gamay na lang, pero lahi ang term, dili siya cloning. Kuan siya, parthenogenesis. Ang parthenogenesis, in which ang female individual magbuntis siya kahit walay fertilization sa sperm galing sa male. So, mura siya virgin birth. So, in short, ang genetic makeup anang offspring na sa parthenogenesis is similar sa other offspring. So mura gyapon siya cloning process, pero dili siya exactly cloning yun, pero wala siya. Pero hinahinay na siya nagkawala once mag-reach na siya sa amphibian group to the vertebrate. Pero sa isda pwede pa. Ang parthenogenesis sa reptiles, wala naman ata. Nara sa isda. Ang sharks, pwede pa. Hindi na kung padayon.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. Asa na ta? Okay, so we have here the multicellular algae that forms, unicellular siya, forms into colonial. So we have a colonial type. We have the ball box species. Okay, the ball box consists of tiny cells forming into a one cell. Okay. Ito yung mga biflagellate cells ng ball box. Okay. Ang nasa sa loob ng ball box, you have here the daughter, synovia, formed by asexual reproduction. Then once mabasag ito, ma-release niya ang synovia. Okay, another one, we have filamentous algae. Single algal cells that form long visible chains. So, example, ang Spirogyra. So, ito yung Spirogyra na structure. Meron siyang vacuole, cell wall, meron siyang septum. So, this is a single cell Spirogyra. We have also synocytic algae. Synocytic algae composed of one large cell without cross walls. So this is a synocytic. Watcherea. Wala siya septum na nag-divide sa per body. So, ang synocytic also present na characteristic sa mga fungi group. The same thing sa filamentous na characteristics. Diba, kadali. At kailangan ako tubig. Exam ano eh. So let's proceed. Morphological characteristics naman ng mga multicellular algae like the ulva. Itong ulva. Nani sa samal ba? Dila ninyo ni mapansin. Kasi during low tide, flatten lang na siya na green. Pero pag high tide, ningani na yan itsura. Ulva, lactuca. Okay. Have large complex of leaf-like talus. So, murag na siya leaf-like appearance, pero di na siya dahon. Now, we have also diatoms, another type of morphology that contains silica or mga glass protist. So, one example ng species, genus, we have Diatoma species and Cyclotelia species. Brown algae. So we have here the brown algae under the division of Phaeophyceae. They have brown pigments. So these are the representatives of the brown algae. We have the Spronocus, Dicoyota, Sargassum, Sphacellaria, Laminaria, Desmarestia, Ectocarpus, Tyloteris, Cutleria. So those are...
Ma'am, dili mo na brown ang laminaria, ma'am.
Huh?
Ang laminaria, ma'am, ba? Dili na brown, green man na.
Naman na siya pigment na brown. Mumana ang grupo sa mga kelp.
Ay, mo na kelp, ma'am.
Yeah. Muna giant kelp. Okay, mostly marine, they contain chlorophyll A. So, meron siyang chlorophyll C, which also green na siya. But majority sa kanilang pigment is fluoxanthin. Okay, reproduction is by mitosis and meiosis. They have the hold fast. Ang hold fast lang is for anchorage ang gamit. And they has three sections. So from hold fast, we have the stipe. Mura siya represent sa stem. Mura siya stem, pero di siya stem. And also bladder. Ito, to allow them to float. And the blade. Itong parang leaves nila. So this is the blade. So they store lamina rin as the byproduct of their photosynthesis. The cell wall is made up of cellulose and alginic acid. Next group, we have the Rhodophyceae, or we called it the red algae. So the majority sa kanilang pigment composed of beta-carotene. Ang beta-carotene, pwede siya red. Range sa iyang color is red to orange. So we have freshwater and marine algae, represented the Porifera, Torrea, Gelidium, Corallinia, Ceramium, Gracilaria, and Champia. So ilang general characteristics, they have chlorophyll A and D, pigments with beta-carotene, lutein, protoxanthin, myxoxanthin, violaxanthin. Sexual reproduction, oogamy. So, zoospores absent. So, munang nagrupo sila as one because of these characters. Male gametes, no flagella. So, doesn't mean na green man siya or red, pero under the characteristics ng Rhodophyceae, ito yung general characteristics that makes them similar within the genus. Okay, haplobiontic or diplobiotic life cycle in their alternation generation. Next, we have the Chlorophyceae. Kani siya purely green. So marine fresh ang ecosystem na ubang species thrive in fresh environment. Some are restricted only to marine. Pwede din silang unicellular, colonial, or multicellular. They have rigid cell wall. Ang pinaka-common among them is they have pyrenoids. And reproduction is through sexual, asexual, and vegetative reproduction. Next, we have the Xanthophyceae. Ang kanila is chlorophyll A, E, and C. So that is the common pigment found in the yellow-green algae group. Okay, they lack fucoxanthin. They store oil. So this is a distinguishing characteristics ng mga Xanthophyceae that they store oil. So the storage polymer is chrysolamina-rin. So that is common among them. Reproduction is also asexual. Representative is Boscharea, found to be oogamous, and Botridium reproduces by means of mastigote zoospores or aplanospores. And they do well in low pH. So they thrive in acidic condition. At the same time, aquatic environment that is rich in iron. So pwede, most of the species under this group are endemic kasi gusto lang nila na environment is low pH. So acidic, not all areas are acidic man. And not all areas are rich in iron. We have also Pyrophyceae, Pyrophyta, or we called it the dinoflagellates. Unique on this group that they have pigments yellow, blue, green, red, or brown. But common to them, they have chlorophyll A and C and carotenoids. Some genus of this group also known as red tide, nakakos ng red tide because of the red pigment. Okay, they store fats and starch. The reproduction is sexual, isogamous, and asexual through binary fission. When we say binary fission, sa itong annotation. Pag binary fission, this cell mag-divide half into identical cells. So for example, kanina siya na cell, mutunga ni siya, hinay-hinay, forming two individual cells. So some species contain neurotoxin o saxitoxin found in red diatoms. Mo ni ang nakakos og red tide. And some have bioluminescent luciferin serve as defense against predators. So this group also could be found sa mga open seas and also deep sea areas. Kani sila at night makikita mo talaga bioluminescent. There were already parang na-feature na ito siya sa mga movies na mga bioluminescent algae. Chrysophyllaceae, or we call the golden algae, mostly marine, some in freshwater. So when we say mostly marine, kadaghanan sa mga species were located sa marine ecosystem and only few in freshwater. Could either be unicellular or colonial. So this is an example of colonial Regularia. Contains chlorophyll A and C plus fluoxanthin or pocheriaxanthin. They store cryolaminarin. So mura ka mo ng golden appearance sila kailang gina-store na type of starch. Some with flagella. Some store also carbohydrates and oil droplets. Cellulosic envelopes lorica or silica. So ang ilahang cell wall is made up of either lorica or silica. So na sila pagka-glassy appearance like sa mga dinoflagellates. Sexual is isogamous, anisogamous, or oogamous. Pwede ang tatlo ang sexual pattern na ilang ginagamit for reproduction. And life cycle is haplotonic. Next, we have a type of algae na pwede siya plants, pwede din siya animals, animal behavior. And they are swimming. So we have the Euglenophaceae. So unicellular, Euglena, ang common name, mostly in freshwater environment. So kadaghanan sa kanila, makikita sa mga rivers, streams, and ponds. It stores paramylon and fat. No cell wall. So dali lang na sila mapatay. Distinguished by having eye spot. So this is an eye spot. This is used to detect light. Chlorophyll A and B plus carotene and xanthophyll are the common pigments found in this group, and they reproduce by asexual by mitosis. But they form endospore if the condition of the environment is not favorable. So for example, ang pond nag-dry up, so they have to be inactive in a form of endospore. So mag-form na sila encasement, marag naa sila case to encase themselves during dry season. Once you reach your third year sa inyong ecology, abot kung na mo experiment, ani ka nang pahimuon mo o hay infusion using pond water, kogon, and some yeast. Makita ninyo na different cells ang inyong ma-observe, mga different types of protists after 3 days or 4 days na fermentation. We have also Cyanophyta, Cyanophyta, o Cyanobacteria. Sometimes this group are linked to the kingdom Monera or the bacteria itself because they have common characteristics ng bacteria. They don't have nucleus. But in other side po, belong po siya sa protist kingdom because na siya ability to reproduce their own food, and some of the characteristics are also found as in between siya sa eukaryote and prokaryote. But other references declared it na it is a prokaryote because majority of the characteristics ng cyanobacteria underlie sa prokaryote. So microscopic in size, like what in the bacteria, they contain chlorophyll A, phycobiliproteins, phycoerythrin, phycocyanin, and allocyanin. So they store glycogen, cyanophysin, starch. So that is a type of starch. Cell wall is made up of peptidoglycan, like what we have in the bacteria. Ang peptidoglycan kasi is also a component found in bacterial cell wall. Unicellular filamentous and parenchymatous ang mga cyanobacteria. So pwede sila mag-group together, either unicellular siya, mag-inusara as one cell, o mag-grupo forming a colonial, filamentous naman ang appearance, or parenchymatous. So they lack nucleus, kaya sila na-belong sometimes sa bacterial group and other membrane organelles. So munang mag-consider sila as bacteria. Hindi siya eukaryotic. So now, sexual reproduction. So these are the different unicellular forms ng mga protist or algae group. Okay. For summary sa ng algae group, again, we have this field guide. So kung gusto mo mag-study ng algae, linog,
Yes.
linog, no?
Yes, ma'am. Naglinog.
Hindi ko ba mo kung nalipo. Naglihok ka, magaya kong table. Okay, so these are the groups of algae na macrocellular. So these are the classification of algae. So isa pa lang to na parts ang algae. Wala pa tatong other groups. Okay, to summarize the difference and similarities among algae groups. So we have class Chlorophyllaceae, Centrophyllaceae, Chrysophyllaceae, Basidiophyllaceae, Cryptophyllaceae, Dinophyllaceae, Chloromonadianae, Euglenophyaceae, Phyllophyllaceae, Rhodophyllaceae, and Cyanophyllaceae. But in other references also, kaning type of classification sa class, naiuban dire na mag-group into 1, mag-group into 2. So lahi po ang depende sa author of taxonomic classification. And what are the pigments present? Ito, second column. And the locomotory organs and the number of locomotory organs like in flagella. And also the stored food. Usay after sa ilang chemosynthesis, usay ilang na-produce. Some produces starch, some produces fat and leucocene, oils and leucocene mo nang naiuban, green siya, pero na-belong siya sa other group because of this iyang ginastore. Murang dira siya na-belong na group. Lesson para at before darating ang week for the exam. So this is the first week. So this is the first week for the midterm period. So we have, because the fourth week of the midterms, kay ting exam na po na siya. So munang dili pwede malag behind. So for today, yesterday we discussed on the first group of one of the first group of eukaryotes under the kingdom Protista, the autotrophic group called the Algae group, because these are unicellular or multicellular organisms that can produce their own food. So, but they are simple compared to the kingdom Plantae. But still, na-include sila sa na-mention a part of it because some nando siya sa one kingdom Protista. And this kingdom Protista have also the members that act like an animal at the same time. So dito, we mentioned first the group of protists that are behaving like an animal, like a plant. So most of them that are mentioned yesterday have the ability to reproduce their own food. Now for this day, we have to discuss a second part of the members of the kingdom Protista. We have the Protozoans. Okay, the Protozoans mostly are unicellular, but they don't have the ability to reproduce their own food. So they acquire energy from other cells. They can be predator type or the commensal type or the parasitic type. So let's proceed before we proceed to chapter 9. Let's discuss the protozoans, because some protozoans may be a link to the evolutionary development. For the first group of phylum, we have the Porifera, because the Porifera have a link to the colonial development of the protozoans. Okay, we shall start on the protozoans. Yeah. Okay, so we have the protozoans. When we say protozoans, these are the little animalcules o maliliit na hayop kung sa Tagalog pa, because the suffix cules referring to small. So like organ, organelle, even the ALES also termed as small. So little organs. So we have little animals, so the animalcules. Now, they could be differentiated, grouped together, or classified based on their structures, their behavior, and their type of reproduction. Like for example, the zooflagellates. Okay, the zooflagellates distinguishedly known to have flagella as their primary distinguishing characteristics. Flagella is their primary locomotory organ, and most of them are parasitic. And like other protozoans, their development is more on asexual binary fission. So we have the Sarcodina or Sarcodines, the group for the amoeboid protozoans. We have the ciliates. Like the zooflagellates, the locomotory organ for ciliates, or this group of ciliata in other references, the primary organ, locomotory organ, are the cilia. Sa sarcodines naman, ang primary locomotory organ are pseudopodia. And mga sporozoans, they don't have this locomotory organ, but the type of development is quite different compared to the three major groups. So the zooflagellates in other books, they are also called the zoomastigina. So they behave like an animal and they swim. They are pelagic. Some of these members may have 2 or 6 or 1 flagella in a cell. Some become parasitic, but mostly of them are parasitic and parasitic known to man. Sometimes they could cause sexually transmitted diseases, or they could cause loose bowel movement, like what we have, the Giardia lamblia, calmidomas. So those are examples of protozoans that have medical importance in human health. So later on when you reach, so don't forget this kind of protozoans because this will reappear again, will be rediscussed again when you have your microbiology and parasitology. So general characteristics ng zooflagellates, or these are we call the protozoans that has a flagella. Most of them are unicellular that reproduce asexual or sexual. Now, zooflagellates live inside a specific host. So to those parasitic type, they require a host in their development. Like we have the trypanosoma. Ito ang example ng trypanosoma. The trypanosoma will cause malaria. Okay, we have some protozoans will ride on a certain vector, especially sa mga insects like tsetse flies. Okay, this is a tsetse fly. And this will cause sleepiness fever or sleeping disorder. So if you are bitten with this kind of fly, you will sleep forever until you die. So hindi ka nagigising. So they will carry that is caused by the Trypanosoma gambiense. So that is an African sleeping sickness. So we have this in Africa and also in India. Last year, meron silang case sa 2 years ago before the pandemic, they have an epidemic also of this kind of infection, Trypanosoma gambiense. Nakatayo ka lang, bigla ka lang mag-shutdown once you are bitten with this type of insect. The sarcodines, or we call mga protozoans with pseudopodia, false feet. So the sarcodines or sarcodina, these are animal protists that use pseudopodia for feeding and movement. So pseudopod, this is a false foot, but we have different types of pseudopodia. So in Harley and Miller book, there's a classification of type of pseudopodia mentioned like lobopodia, Phyllopodia, marag tatlo yung 3 types yun. Kindly visit on that chapter because it was not mentioned here in a PowerPoint. So try to read more on the Sarcodina group. But other references, ang Sarcodina is subgroup of a specific group. So like remember, we have the foraminifera. So this is a foraminiferan. The difference ng mga foraminifera with the amoeba or the amoeba proteus. So this is amoeba proteus. Para lang siyang blob or plasma. But this one will serve as their pseudopodia. So any part of the cell membrane will be represented as the pseudopodia. Now, the difference with the foraminifera. Okay, the foraminifera have a casement. So, meron silang shell, calcified shell. So, made up of calcium. So, that is foraminifera. So, ganito ang shape ng mga foraminiferans. Parang siyang shell ng mollusca. Ito namang Radiolaria, para siyang chandelier, or they have different forms of Radiolarians. The difference with the foraminiferan, their shell is made up of silica. So, meron silang glassy appearance. Glassy appearance ito siya. Ito calcified ang foraminiferans. So, that is the difference between the two groups, the amoeba proteus, the foraminiferans, and the Radiolarians. So in the laboratory, we're going to collect pictures of these samples from the internet and also try to describe them. Ano yung basic characteristics nila? Yung ano talaga, diagnostic. When we say diagnostic, the unique characteristics of this group and where can be found. So this one, the foraminiferans and radiolarians could also be found sa mga marine and, excuse me, marine ecosystem. Only few species are radiolarians. May freshwater. Ito naman si Amoeba proteus, mostly in freshwater environment. So I don't know if there are still species found in the marine environment because the type of aquatic environment is hypertonic. So probably baka ma-shrink ang cell agad-agad because it is only made of simple membrane. Now, amoeba could be a possible parasite to the human intestine. So meron din siyang medical importance because it could cause loose bowel movement, dehydration to a person who got infected with this kind of protozoans. And these protozoans in a harsh environment could form a cyst. So mag-insist stage po siya. So the life cycle of the amoeba from tropozoid. So this is the tropozoid stage. So when we say tropozoid, spelling nito, wait na. So this is the tropozoid stage. Tropozoid. So tropozoid stage of the amoeba is well active. While ang cystic stage the cystic stage is yung dormant stage. So they are not active. It is the stage where they have to keep themselves safe for the very harsh environment, and that would protect them for a certain period of time. So if we got this in our system, some other would say na they are careful already on whatever they're going to eat, not too oily, because that would activate the amoeba in their system. So katong nag-suffer na og amoebiasis, pwede matrigger uli because there are some cells of amoeba could retain in their system. And once the system or GIT tract is already basic, which is the favorite environment of the amoeba, then magsasuffer ka na naman uli ng vomiting and diarrhea. So, dapat acidic ang portion, like especially ang stomach, because that would kill also the amoeba easily. Okay. Next group, we have so the amoeba have this contractile vacuole. Now the purpose of the contractile vacuole, this would help them maintain their cellular space or their cell itself. So whatever excess of water will be expelled by the contractile vacuole. So this is the pseudopodia that will help them to transfer from one area to the other. And distinct nucleus. So in a simple microscopic slide, so this is the amoeba proteus. Ang makikita lang sa microscopic slide with a simple stain, we have here the nucleus. Then the rest, ito na yung cytoplasm. Then we have here a thin membrane called the cell membrane. And katong mga patches, mga dots, we have the food vacuole. So the nucleus is visible in a simple dye during microscopy. So this could cause amoebic dysentery if you are infected. So amoeba reproduces asexually through binary fission. So when we say binary fission, the cytoplasm, the nucleus will undergo meiotic division, then later on cytokinesis. When we say cytokinesis, this is the division of the cytoplasm. Next, we have the ciliate groups. The ciliates, the primary organ, or under the group of the ciliophora. So in other references, it was mentioned as ciliata. Other references also termed it as phylum Ciliophora or division Ciliophora. These are animal-like protists that uses cilia as their locomotory organ. So makikita nyo ito. So, asa makikita so ciliates is shorter than the flagellates. So, in a simple microscopic view, hindi mo makikita ang ciliates or ang cilia itself. So, makita mo siya as shadow, kagaya nito. Parang siyang shadow. Small, short, hair-like structures. So, that is a cilia. So, one known sample to represent the ciliate group are the paramecium. So, this is a paramecium, all of it. The three images are all paramecium. Okay, cilia is a short hair-like projection used for the movement. And there are also, aside from paramecium, we still have, so the paramecium in the schematic diagram, ganito ang itsura. So it was really covered with cilia all over the cell. So hindi lang sa gilid, but all throughout the cell surface. So in a microscopic slide, ganito ang itsura ng paramecium. Now, we have another sample ng ibang paramecium. We have the dinum, which you could research that because that will be mentioned in a laboratory activity. The dinum, ballbox, sino pa? Si paramecium, isa na doon. Now, sa Zoomastigophora, we have the Euglena, Giardia lamblia as the sample for flagellated protozoan sa inyong activity. Now, in ciliata, aside from having cilia, they have two nucleus. So, they have two nuclei, plural na pala, kung isa nucleus. So, they have two nuclei, one macronucleus and other is micronucleus. Now, each nucleus performs specific function. Macronucleus holds the genetic material, controls the cellular activities. While the micronucleus, this is the extra copy DNA, and this will be used during binary fission. So, before the cell will divide, or conjugation process, not binary fission. During conjugation, it requires two cells. So it requires two cells. Then during conjugation process, they will have a bridge called the pili that will be used to exchange, since dalawa man ang kanilang nuclei. So yung maliit na nuclei, ibigay niya sa isang cell. At the same time, itong paramecium, we'll use another color. Okay. The paramecium of the paramecium B, let's say paramecium B, will also donate the small nuclei to paramecium A. So, i-transfer niya sa cell. Then, that is conjugation. Then, afterwards, each cell will undergo binary fission. So, isa ka cell, once they receive already the micronuclei, magdi-divide na siya into another copy of paramecium. So, kung dalawa yan, ang isa mag-produce ang dalawang cell. So, pwede binary, pwede din multiple binary fission in certain period of time. So, that is the asexual reproduction of ciliates. So, reproduction conjugation is the sexual reproduction because it exchanges the genetic material from one cell to the other. And binary fission is the asexual reproduction. Pwede sila mag-binary fission kahit walang conjugation. So they can do asexual or binary fission kahit walang conjugation. So that is asexual reproduction. Meron din silang contractile vacuole. So we have like the amoeba. Now, contractile vacuole is very important to all protozoans because this will help them retain their cell. So, cell volume, cell shape. Okay, kung too much water inside the cytoplasm, tendency the cell membrane will break up for certain limits or mabuto ang cell. Pero kung dali ra po siya mawadaan ng tubig, then mag-shrink po siya kung it depends on the type of aquatic environment. Now let's have the group of the sporozoans. Now sporozoans is has the most complex sa life cycle among protozoans because it undergoes several stages. So the ang unique sa sporozoans because even though wala siyang locomotory organ, but it has a complex of all protozoans. Ito yung may pinaka-complex life cycle. So, like for example, it requires a host and a vector. Now, the vector is the Anopheles mosquito. We have Anopheles mosquito in our country. Kuha na siya. Dagko na siya lalumok. Mas larger na siya sa Aedes aegypti. Wala siya black and white band sa tiil. So, mas kahadlukan po ni siya aside from dengue. Okay. This is the transmission. So, the mosquito will inject, the infected mosquito carrying the sporozoites will inject through the saliva. So, once the mosquito had its blood meal, ang sporozoid ma-release siya through the release of the saliva ng mosquito. So, ma-inject siya, ma-release niya ihang saliva sa bloodstream, then bago kukuha ng blood. Now, since nasa bloodstream ang the sporozoids will travel throughout the blood system. And as it reaches to the liver, it turns into a merozoite. Now, the merozoite, since ang liver is connected to the circulatory system, especially sa portal area, will go to the bloodstream, the merozoite, then invaded to the arteries where the RBC are found. And ito yung i-attack niya ang RBC. So the red blood cells, they will attack the red blood cells, infect the red blood cells, then and continues their development. So from merozoite, they'll go in the RBC, releasing its content, parang bacteriophage, parang virus. Then they will develop and releases new developed sporozoans into gametocytes. These gametocytes will form a sexual reproduction. And once the gametocytes fertilizes, it forms into a zygote. Then the zygote undergoes meiotic or magiging form ng oocyst. Then mag-release naman siya ng sporozoids. Pero doon na siya sa circulatory system. That is why once you got infected, magbaba ang imong RBC. So, in short, sporozoans requires two hosts. The first host is the vector, and the definitive host, where the final stage of development of the sporozoans are the vertebrates. So, hindi lang humans ang kanyang pwedeng ma-infect, but also other vertebrates. So, we have the vector as the primary host and the definitive host. So muna ang requirements sa sporozoans, that is why complex siya, because it requires two hosts to complete its life cycle. Unlike sa other protozoans, tropozoid and cystic stage. The same thing with the flagellated group, tropozoid and the cystic stage. Simple lang ang ilahang life cycle.
Question, ma'am.
Yes, Leo.
About atong kwan ba to, ma'am? About atong previous na protozoan katong sporozoans to, ma'am, no? Kwan man ba, aside sa ilang reproduction, ma'am, or aside sa ilang asexual or sexual reproduction, how about ang ilahang pagkaon? Like, unsa man sila mag-digest og pagkaon, ma'am?
They will go in sa sa RBC. Dito sila magpuyo. Para makompleto ang ilang life cycle. That is one way how they feed themselves and at the same time develop faster than feeding compared sa other larger parasites. Munang mas delikado sila kay mas paspas sila mag-develop. While nagakaon nag-develop, murag ana ang siste ng mga sporozoans. Pero sa dengue, Plasmodium vivax. Plasmodium vivax, Plasmodium, muna nakako sa mga, Plasmodium vivax, napati isa ka species. Mga Plasmodium species muna ang mga deadly. Plasmodium. Plasmodium falciparum. Nani sa to ang country. Consider siya as algae. So muna ang Plasmodium falciparum. This is one of a member of Apicomplexa. So another term for the sporozoans, mga Apicomplexa. Deadly po ni siya. Ang nakakos ng malaria, ang Plasmodium species. Lahi ang dengue. Ang dengue nakakos viral ang dengue. Ang trypanosoma, siya ang makakos ng sleeping sickness. So ang Plasmodium vivax, Plasmodium falciparum, this is one of the representatives that has a complex life cycle na protozoan. Samanlay, napakalay? Question?
Wala to akong question, ma'am. Thank you.
So, ang life cycle ng sporozoans at the same time, feeding behavior niya is sabay. So, once it got infect a one cell, nandun na yung feeding at the same time, reproduction. So, mas paspas yung reproduction. Muna, kanang malaria, murag kuan po na siya, murag po siya dengue. So, mas paspas din ang dengue compared sa malaria. Okay, so any questions sa protozoans?
Wala to akong question, ma'am. Thank you.
Hallelujah, okay, welcome. Okay, let's proceed. So wala nang tanong sa protozoans. So your activity, ano yan siya na belong? Basta na ay activity about sa protozoans. It mentions there almost maraming gimension dyan na merong Foraminifera, Radiolaria, Didynum. Ambot ko na appeal pa ba ang Trypanosoma? Sporozoans. Ambot ko na mention pa ba ang sporozoans? Ikatong Falciparum vivax. Plasmodium vivax and Plasmodium falciparum. Amoeba proteus, oo, na-mention. 2 stages, yung cystic stage and cystic stage and the trophocyte stage. Giardia lamblia was also mentioned. Radiolaria. Ano po ito yung isa? Okay, Radiolaria. Paramecium. Okay, na-mention din yan sa activity. So you must be familiar. Ang amoeba proteo, ang amoeba have different kinds of species also. Pero hindi ko na yan siya i-mention at this stage kasi ma-mention yan siya further when you reach microbiology and ma-repeat na naman yan siya when you reach parasitology. Yeah, you will able to determine the species of amoeba by determining their nuclei pattern, nuclear morphology. So we're done on the protozoans. Now let's proceed sa sa chapter 9. Saan naman share? Ayan. Okay, multicellular and tissue levels of organization. So there are 2 theories regarding on the development of multicellularity of the organism. And bakit nagkaroon ng multicellular or mga colonial development that leads to operating as one organism. Okay. So, yes. Problema. Kasi nag-on ang mic. Kasi Entrix. Okay. So, wala. So what is the origin of multicellularity? So multicellularity, life across quickly in 100 million years ago. And we have the hypothesis called the colonial hypothesis. Now, the colonial hypothesis believed that all protozoans group together and they form specialization or compartmentalization. What does it mean? Katudong mga flagellated protozoans, ciliated, and amoeboid, they form a colony. So they live symbiotically. And as the surface area increases, a part of the colony performs specific tasks. Like for example, protozoans exposed in the external or located externally becomes the integument or providing protection or protecting other cells. Yan. Now, other cells naman, like the quanoflagellates, which resembles the flagellated protozoans, become part of filtering fragments coming from the water and engulfing towards the system, so sa inner part of the organism. And later on, the amoeboid group of this within the colony performs the digestion part, in which it breaks down all the filtered components and distribute it all throughout the system. So, ganyan ang colonial hypothesis, in which all protozoans that group as one colony, and later on as the surface area increases, specialization of function develops. So scientists believe that the multicellularity could have arisen and dividing cells remain together. So this is the early colonial protists. So nagrupo ang mga colonial flagellated protozoans. Then as they continue developing by cellular development like asexual reproduction, binary fission, they become larger, creating a hollow sphere. So this is the hollow sphere, may space sa gitna. Then one of the protozoan cells become reproductive cells, and they created an enfolding. So sa kadami-dami, continually nag-multiply ang mga cells, nag-create siya ng enfolding. Now once nag-create siya ng enfolding, so the need of the colony to survive, so they have to perform specific tasks. Like this one, ang naka-expose sa labas is more on protecting the cells inside. So naging part siya ng integument. While the cell inside will do the function on digestion process, then distribute it to the nearby cells. Muna ang gastrula, or the primitive type na stomach. Okay, how about syncytial? Okay, second hypothesis is the syncytial hypothesis, where a syncytium is a large multinucleated cells. The formation of the plasma membranes in the cytoplasm of a syncytial protist could have produced a small, then later on turns to multicellular organisms. Sabi nila, it derived from a single cell. So syncytial refers to a protoplasm that contains numerous nuclei not separated from each other by a plasma membrane. So in short, it found in one cell. Pero the cell must have several nuclei. So ito yung several nuclei inside the cytoplasm. Now, once daw na-divide inside, nagkaroon din ng replication sa loob, creating a lot of cells. Katulad each nuclei develop into another cell. Now, the problem of the syncytial theory, the radial symmetry occurs in radiates like sponges, cnidarians, ctenophores, and placozoans will not reflect, hindi siya magkaroon ng resemblance based on the presentation sa syncytial theory, but closer ang presentation more on sa colonial theory. So, mas relevant ang phylum ng Porifera, Cnidaria sa colonial theory. Bakit? Later on, as we go further sa anatomy ng first group of protozoa, first group of invertebrates, the most primitive one, the sponges. Now, sponges, primarily marine animals. So, they are living together with the corals. So, magpakamala natin sila ng plants, but they are not plants. They are an animal. Okay, ang only plant lang sa dagat are the seagrass. Seagrass lang. Maski even the seaweeds, they are not plants. They belong to kingdom Protista in the Algae group. So again, sponges are not plants, but they are animals. So in short, they don't have the capability to reproduce their own food. So kung wala ang tatay pandemic karon, manggawas unta ta sa dagat. Mo ni ang first exposure sa zoology, maligo og dagat. So way back, katong wala pa mga accident sa field trips, way back mga 2010, maligo mi sa Blue Jazz. Dito sa may Angel Cove, basta blue lang gihapon ang pangalan. Kalihera siya. Murag kaatbang niya ang Talikod Island. Na isa ka resort din ha. Also known resort po na siya. Ideal for diving. Since doon sa iyaha ang corals kasi ang location sa resort is naa siya sa cliff. Then ang iyang shoreline is also cliff. So naalay gamay na murag part na mura siya pwede tamakanan. Pero a few meters away na, cliff na siya kung saan nag-grow ang mga corals. And murag na siya sa trench. Located siya near the trench. So medyo lalum din siya totally. So we have here the Phylum Porifera. So imagine nyo na lang na nag-dive ta. Natutag dagat para mabisita aning mga hayupa. Phylum Porifera could either be in two types of symmetry. Radial, because there are some poriferans who have a perfect shape, but there are also sponges that don't have a shape or irregular ang shape. O, hindi pantay-pantay ang yung shape, that means. So there are three types of cells found in the Phylum Porifera. We have the pinacocytes, located on the external part of the sponges. We have the mesenchyme cells found the inner portion of the sponges, and the choanocytes. These are flagellated cells that will serve as the filtering cells inside the sponge. The central cavity or several branching chambers, these are the pathway where the water will go in and exit. So, kung makita natin sa sponge, may mga holes dyan that will serve as the entry of water. And kung meron kayong makita na bigger hole on top of it, that would be the exit area of the water. In short, poriferans have no tissue nor organs, but theoretically made up of cells that look alike to the protozoans. Okay, cell types of body wall and skeleton. Sponges, how did they keep their shape in the different depths of water? Okay, sponges are specialized for particular function. They have the pinacocytes. So these cells are known as the skin cells that covers the sponge and protect the sponge externally. And they may be slightly contractile that help the sponge change its shapes. Some pinacocytes specialize into porocytes, which regulates the entry of water. So this is a schematic diagram of the cross-section of the sponge. Now, we have here This one, kaning flattened cells, the pinacocytes. So the pinacocytes will serve as the epidermal cells of the sponge. And we have here another pinacocyte that transforms into a porocyte. When we say porocyte, it creates a pore or the opening for the water to enter. So dito mag-e-enter ang water. Then we have here the spicule. Okay, the spicule will serve as the support organ of the sponge that will resist pressure. So it keeps the sponge in shape with the help of the spicules. And we have the archaeocyte. Now, kaning archaeocyte, some scientists believe that this is the amoeboid descended from amoeba. And bakit sila ma-relate sa amoeba protozoans? Because the archaeocytes behave also like the amoeba. And we have the choanocytes. The choanocytes could be related to the flagellated protozoans because of the presence of flagellum. So theoretically, they believe that there are some groups of protozoans. The evolution of the sponges evolved when the group of protozoans grouped together as a colony that later on evolved into a sponge. Okay. So the jelly-like layer under the pinacocyte is the term mesohyl. So this is the space, the mesohyl, or we call the mesenchyme. Balik man. So mesenchyme cells are amoeboid and move about the mesohyl. So they specialize for reproduction, transporting and storing food, and at the same time digestion. So beneath the mesenchyme's lining inner chamber are the choanocytes, or we call it collar cells. That is another term or layman's term for choanocytes. They are flagellated cells that could resemble them to the flagellated protozoans. So let's have a simple example of a sponge. Now you hear, ito yung dissected part ng sponge. And we have here, a sponge is covered with pinacocytes. Now, there are pinacocytes that transforms into a pore or the opening, small opening of the sponge, and these are called porocytes. Porocytes derive also from pinacocytes. So the porocytes will allow the entry of water going to the inner part of the sponge. So we have the arrow shown here, how the water will enter inside the body of the sponge. And in between, manipis lang ito. You have the kaning light orange na may mga kaning lighter pa na orange. We have the spicules. The spicules will hold all or a part of the sponge together para hindi magwatak-watak. Para din siyang connective tissue, pwede din siyang support, pwede din siyang skeletal system ng sponge. So that these are the spicules, because spicules are made up of calcium carbonate. Some are also made up from silica. Okay. So nandito yung ito yung blue, ito yung mga mesenchymal cells or yung amoeboid behavior na sila yung mag-protect at the same time parang phagocytes, mag-undergo sila ng phagocytosis para kainin yung mga foreign cells that enters the system. Pwede din sila mag-digest coming from the choanocytes. They will digest the food and also deliver the food to all the system. So the osculum will serve as the exit point of water. Sa quanocytes, so i-enlarge niya. Let's have to enlarge the quanocytes. So the quanocyte, ito as a whole. Itong blue, ito yung amoebocyte or the mesenchyme cells that performs phagocytosis and digesting the food particles coming from the quanocytes. So the quanocytes have collar cells. This is how they filter the fragment coming from the water, coming from the porocyte. So the flagellum will turn the water and slowly by its movement, the particulates will be catched by the collar area of the quanocytes. Then later on, this will be moved going toward the body of the quanocytes and they do the phagocytosis, engulfing the captured particulate, then passing it through the amoebocytes by exocytosis. Now, in sponges, based also in morphology and classification, spicules is very useful to differentiate the groups of sponges. Now, the spicules could either be made up of calcium carbonate or silica. This will help the sponge to resist pressure and also support other parts intact. So spicules could be in different forms. Pwede triad. So this is a triad. Pwede ding hook type. Asa itong hook type? Wala tang hook type. Later on. Ayan. So we have different types of spicules aside from its composition na either made up of calcium carbonate or silica. But meron ding other forms. Pwede ding needle type, tetra, triad, or irregular ang shape. So we have the siliceous spicules made up of silica. And we have also a spongin, likely flexible siya compared to the siliceous type of spicules. And spongin will serve as the connective tissue of the sponge because this will hold the parts intact and this will protect the sponge, spongin, keep in shape aside sa spicules. Okay, we have the siliceous spicules also from Desmospongiae and calcareous made up of calcium carbonate. So kung ang spicules is made up of calcium carbonate, that is calcareous spicules. So these are example of spicules found in one specific species na sponge, Pixilia incrustans. So naa siya picker 1, meron siyang hook type, meron din siyang hook type na iba pang pagka-shape. So these are the shapes and forms of spicules. Now water currents and body forms. This is another classification category to classify the sponges into other groups. Sponges' lives depend on water, current, and the quanocytes create. So it brings food and water. It brings food at the same time dissolve oxygen and also remove waste. The method of food filtration and the circulation reflect body forms in the phylum. So we have different body forms of sponges. So primarily, the water will enter to the porocyte. Then we have the osculum. So this is the atrio, the central part where the water entered and gathered at the center, then be exited, mag-exit sila through the oscula or the osculo. So there are 3 types of form ng sponges and dito din naka-base ang ilahang classification. First, we have the ascon body. The ascon body have the simplest form of sponge. So they are usually located on the coastal or reef area. Some may have a vase-like form. And this is how they look like. So simple lang. Parang base lang siya. So this is the ascon type. Next naman, so this is ascon type lang gihapon. One entry, one channel of entry. Then we have the main atria, then oscilla. Next, we have the second body form, or the sponge wall appears to be folded. So may infoldings, medyo complex siya compared to the ascon body type. So this is how the ascon body type. And this type of form is highly resistant to pressure compared to the ascon type. So makaresist na ni siya o certain higher pressure sa water pressure sa depth. So this could also be found sa medyo malalim-lalim na. And next one, we have the leucon body form, which is more complex than the ascon. So meron na siyang canal system. And ito ang usual na itsura. So marami na siyang canal system. And this type of body form ng sponge is likely more resistant to pressure. So they usually found more deeper compared to the ascon type. Now, maintenance and function. Sponges feed on particles that ranges the size of 0.1 to 50 micrometer. So they usually feed bacteria, mo nang usually limpyo ang dagat, masking unsang waste ang ginalabay sa dagat, the bacteria were filtered by the sponge. So yun yung ecological importance ng sponge. And at this moment, this kind of animal was already threatened because they are very sensitive. Madali lang sila mamatay. So since kung wala na sponges sa ato ang aquatic environment, the bacteria will proliferate so fast. Like what we have in 1990, ano sa kayo kung ito Boracay, 1992 ang Boracay at that moment was infested with E. coli. And marami siyang algae, mga unwanted algae sa shoreline. Yun pala, wala na yung mga sponges na mag-filter sa bacteria. And highly infested na siya ng taas siyang coliform even though dagat siya. Supposed to be dapat less lang ang coliform or the bacteria. Kaya mamatay man ang bacteria sa salt environment. But ang saltiness ng Boracay noon, nag-low ang iyahang saltiness. So murag ang shoreline was favorable na siya sa bacterial growth. So taas ang iyahang coliform. So yun yung nangyari, wala mag-filter, wala man po, layo pa manggod ang corals, ang sponges. So it is important also reducing coastal turbidity. Kasi gina-filter out nila yun. And yun ang main food nila. Some sponges are carnivorous, so they also catch small crustaceans in deep water. Feeding of metals in quanocytes filter small suspended particles. So the water will pass to the porocyte or the osteae, then goes to the main channel, then exit to the oscilla. Lysosomal enzymes and pH changes and digest particles in the vacuole. So that with the help of the mesenchymal cells or the amoebocytes. So ganito ang filter feeding nila. So from the sponge, the water will enter together with the particulate matter or mga inorganic components. Then, papasok sila sa porocyte or the ostium. Then the archaeocytes will do the phagocytosis. So amoebocytes. Then kung magpunta na sila sa center, the choanocytes again will filter them out. Yung large particles na hindi na-catch ng archaeocytes, ika-catch uli ng choanocytes. Kung naka-escape ang particles sa mga archaeocytes, nandito naman si choanocytes to with the help sa flagella, iyahang ilihok ang flagella. So, ma-absorb niya ang particulate. Then, they go the phagocytosis, then digestion. Others naman, other type, kung hindi niya i-phagocyze niya, then later on, itapon niya ang waste material na hindi kailangan ng cell sa osculum. Okay, in terms of reproduction, sponges are monoecious. So when you say monoecious, both sexes are found in one individual. So pwede din hermaphrodite kung tawagin. But they don't have distinct, di siya matawag na hermaphrodite kasi wala man po siya distinct na female organ system and male organ system. What they had is budding, so asexual reproduction. So they will produce gemmules. So ganito ang gemmule. Microscopic lang ang gemmule. The gemmule was surrounded by spicules. Ito. Para lang siyang seed, but microscopic. Okay. So once the gemmule is, when the environment is already favorable, they will hatch into different larvae. So these are the two forms of larvae. Okay. So let's proceed to specific groups of Porifera. So we have the Hexactelinida, or we call the glass sponge. They have this kind of spicules made up of silica. And the type of spicules also hexaaxons. So meaning hexa, 6. So meron siyang 6 spines in one spicules. Lattice, siliceous with sleeve plate over the osculum. And mostly found in deep waters, 200 meters in abyss. Okay. I already met this kind of Euplectella. Glassy gid siya. Rigid ang iyahang appearance pero dali lang ni siya buak because it is made up of silica. Pero siya glassy in appearance kasi silica man. Next, we have the calcarea. Calcarea, spicules form niya could either be mono or kanang one murag needle type, tri or mura siya kato kaning kwan sa jackstone, mura siya tulo ang iyahang spines, or tetraaxon, upat, when you say tetra, 4. But the spicules are made up of calcium carbonate instead of silica. Wala siyang spongin. So they occupy the shallow water. So kung naata sa shoreline that mayroong corals, naapo na sila dira. So shallow waters na sila. The calcarea could vary from, yung body type could vary from leucon, ascon, and secon. So it has all the body types. Cosmopolitan meaning makita siya masking asa na coastal area. So one representative, we have the Leucosolenia. Next, the most complex one, we have the Desmospongiae. So most common form, leuconoid form. So naa siya leuconoid body form. Ang type of spicules na nasa iya could either be triaxon or tetraaxon. So meron siyang spongin as the connective tissue ng sponge. Brightly colored because of the amoebocytes that carries the pigment. So medyo naani siya sa middle portion sa coral area, sa reef side. So like the sa calcarea, shallow to deep water. So muna ang iyahang range kung asa siya pwede. So this is a grass sponge. Next, we have the sclerospongiae. It has a leuconoid form found in grottos or coral tunnels. So the internal is siliceous and it has a spongin. So katong mga sponges na naay spongin, we have that. If we're going to recall, we have desmospongiae, tapos and sclerospongiae. Ang calcarea o ang hexatemimida, wala sila spongin. So that's the end of the Phylum Porifera. So next week, we proceed to the Coelenterata. So more on chapter 10. Ang Coelenterates then goes after the Coelenterates, Mollusca.